right, it looks like everybody's sort of coming back and coming and going, but we've got to keep on schedule. So I want to introduce Casey Watts. He gave a very well-received keynote talk at the DC Baltimore Perl workshop, which we put on earlier this year. And I felt that his message was so important that I invited him, I nominated him to come here, and he was accepted to come here, to expand on that topic. So if you were at DC Baltimore Perl workshop, you may have seen part of this talk, but you certainly haven't seen it all. He's got a lot in store for us. So without further ado, Casey Watts.
Thanks, Don. Let's see. All right, it's going to squeak. You ready? Oh, wow, it's oiled. Well oiled. So hi, I'm Casey. Good to see you all. I'm going to start by telling you a little bit more about me. One of my favorite things is bubbles. In the summer, I host bubble parties in DuPont Circle in DC. I have this much bubble equipment, a crate. I have to take a crate. I have one of those shopping carts that I take. It's a lot of fun. I love music. I play several instruments in DC's Queer Marching Band. We do every Pride Parade in the area. Yeah. I like it when my instruments match my hair. In the bottom, that's me playing a bass drum dressed as a pirate at a Halloween swing dance, which I also danced at. It's like a lot of me in one picture there. At some point, I was a teacher at Yale University through the IT department, a tech boot camp that they did in the summer. So if you see some teacherisms in this talk, you will. You know where that comes from. I'm giving you homework. No joke. I was a software developer for 10 years. The most recent few were at Heroku, which you may have deployed some apps on. Now, recently, I've switched to being a product manager for the US government, working on immigration for refugee and asylum seekers. I grew up in Baltimore, lived in New Haven for 8 years, and now I'm back in DC. I love DC. I did some neurobiology research while I was at Yale, and there are 3 papers I'm a co-author on, second author. They're very technical. You can see slices, like rat brain slice images there. That's the kind of work I was doing. It's not relevant to this talk, but if you want to look it up later, it's on PubMed. You can find it. A little more about me. Do you think I'm anxious or excited? I'm up here on stage. Both? Yeah, I hear both in the air. Let's talk about that real quick. There are very similar phenomena in the body. If you were studying it in a psychology setting, you might say, physiologically aroused. My heartbeat is probably a little fast right now. My pupils are dilated, I bet. I'm not looking, but it's what happens. I say the difference between anxious and excited is what outcome do I expect it's going to have. So if I expect a bad outcome, I'm going to be anxious. If I expect a good one, I'm going to be excited. But what if I'm not sure? Well, most people, if you're not sure, you're going to think on the bad parts. We're going to focus on that. So most people up here on stage, especially the first few times, would be very anxious, I bet, because you're not sure how it's going to turn out. And let's be real, that's not the amount of uncertainty. It's like this much. One of the tricks that I'm going to talk through a few times in this talk is called reframing. That large black bar in the middle was me thinking what could go wrong. But instead, I could think, what could go right? I could actually improve someone's life through my talk. If there's even one person here whose life changes thanks to this, that's pretty good. I love it. So I am excited. I'm pretty excited. I'm confident it's going to go well for at least enough of you to make it worth my time being here. And thank you all for paying attention, listening, all that. Let's talk about you now. I bet you're a little tired of sitting. I'm glad you took a stretch break just now, if you did. You're probably thinking about lunch. I am. Lunch is after this talk. You might even be hangry if you're like a little grumpy. I don't know. That's a word. It's a portmanteau, hungry and angry. You put it together, that's hangry. So I want to reframe those thoughts. How about you're curious about brains? You're curious about this talk. You're excited about me and what I'm about to tell you. And maybe you just grabbed a coffee and you can feel the caffeine coursing through your veins. That's a little bit more useful right now for paying attention to me better. Thanks. All right, now the meat of the talk. There's 2 halves of the talk. This is a double whammy, the description says. The first part is called Debugging Your Brain, and I'm actually turning that into a book right now. It's all the way written, halfway edited, which means I'm halfway done the work. Editing is so much of it. Second half of the talk is going to be not about inside your brain, but about your teams you work with, psychological safety, how to make your teams effective based on the psychology research. I do have a lot of notes and articles I link to and homework that I assign you, and I'm going to point to that through the talk a few times. And if you want to see a recording, this will have a recording, which is probably the best one as soon as that's up. But in the meantime, if you want to share it with coworkers, friends, family, the Ember Conf video I did 2 years ago was a pretty good one. All right, part A, debugging your brain. I'm going to go through like this. I'm going to start at 1, opportunities. We're going to talk about all the opportunities where this might be useful. And then I'm going to talk about how the brain works, like starting from another point. And then they're going to feed together into cognitive behavioral therapy, which I'll define once we get there. So the opportunities part is now. I drew that with an Apple pencil. A downward spiral is when you're having negative thoughts and negative feelings about a situation, and they make you have more negative thoughts and feelings, and you just feel worse and worse and worse the more you think about it. You've probably experienced this. Some examples. Once, maybe you had an argument at work that got out of control and made you feel awful, and you thought about it for a long time. If you have kids, you might snap at them sometimes, and you might feel bad about it and then feel guilty as a parent. Oh, no, like, that happens. That happened to my mom once. I have a story coming up. Once I was on my way to a meetup to give, I think this presentation probably, and I was hangry. I didn't eat yet. And I was wet. It was raining, and I was running late, and I stepped in a puddle. I was focused on what happened, the rumination. Okay, let me define this word. Rumination is focusing on the bad parts instead of the good parts, and you think about it, and it makes you have a downward spiral. You're thinking about the negative, the causes that got you into this bad situation, and the negative outcomes of it, and it makes you feel worse. Instead, I tried to think of the solutions, the ways to get myself into a better state, or ways of preventing it in the future might make me feel better too. In this case, there was pizza at the meetup. I was looking forward to eating that pizza, and I told myself, you can take your shoes off. If they're soaking wet, nobody will mind. Really, it's fine. And in fact, someone else might do it, and they'll love that you started it. Cool. That's enough for opportunities. You see, the stuff I'm telling might be useful to your life if any of that was relatable. So I'm going to give you 2 neurobiology ideas now. The inner versus outer brain, and then we're going to system model the brain. Inner versus outer brain, I'm going to illustrate with this GIF. That poor kitty. Don't do this to your cat. That cat is really afraid. So 2 things are happening right in this GIF. The cat sees the cucumber, gets scared. That's a very quick, immediate emotion, fear. And then I imagine right after the fact, the cat looks at it, goes up, smells it, and like says, okay, it's just a cucumber, it's fine. Like that's the slower thinking part of the brain. Thinking fast and slow are the 2 different parts of the brain. And I think this dichotomy is a lot more useful than left hemisphere, right hemisphere, is inner versus outer. So the feelings, the quick part, the fast part, is in the inside of the brain. I drew that with my Apple pencil too. I'm getting it to be an artist lately. It's nicknamed the low road, and it's really fast on the scale of milliseconds. That's the quick jump response. Thoughts have to go a lot farther. They have to go all the way around this brain loop on the outside. It's slower. That's on the scale of seconds. The cat had to think about it. And that's the 2 things. The feelings happen very quickly, and thoughts happen a little slower. All right, next, let's model the brain as a system. You might have seen this diagram before. I'm lucky I had an 8th grade engineering class. I don't know. That's really cool. I'm glad they did. This is the engineer's system, as my teacher called it, or the IPO model, input, process, output. And the feedback loop is pretty important. The 8th grade example I had was a thermostat. So the room temperature is the input to the thermostat. Then the thermostat compares it to the value you've set. And if it's higher, then it puts the AC on. If it's lower, it puts the heat on. Whatever, it does that. That's the output. And then it spits the hot or cold air into the room. And that's the feedback loop. The air becomes that temperature, which turns into the input. All right, so that's the IPO model. Let's model an animal using this. We might simplify and say that they just respond to their environment. Pavlov's dog, in the traditional psychology experiment, you rang a bell and the dog would salivate because the dog knew food was coming. That would be input, output, very simplified model. We like to think we humans have conscious thought, which makes us very different from animals. Except when we're on autopilot. When we're on autopilot, we're not really processing. We're not thinking thoughts so deliberately. We're just kind of responding to our environment. It happens to us too, just like you might imagine it would to animals. And you're thinking actively. I would use the term mindful to describe that. And if you ever hear the word mindful and you think that's a weird word, I don't know what it means. I think it just means being consciously aware and influencing your thoughts. That's my use of the word mindful. So thoughts and feelings, we just talked about those, and now we have this model. I'm going to put them together. So you have as inputs automatic feelings, like if you saw a cucumber, you might jump. That's an automatic feeling of fear. Automatic thoughts, like, that's so scary. I don't know, you might like hear words. Words and thoughts are kind of related. They're like the same thing for this talk. Those are automatic, and I would consider those inputs. Like, you did not decide to be afraid of that thing. You did not decide to think that it's scary. But you can think deliberate thoughts right after the fact and say, wait a minute. And like anything that you influence, control your brain, that's a deliberate thought. Can you have a deliberate feeling? Not quite, but you could influence them using your thoughts. So I want to put that as part of the middle process part too. So anytime you have deliberate thoughts, that's you're influencing, that's the process, the consciousness. So the consciousness is this middle column, the process, and you're responsible for that part, and you're not really responsible for the inputs that are on the left. You're just responsible for taking note of them. And so that all applies when you're in a downward spiral. You want to influence the situation there. How do you do it? We're going to optimize this system together. That came together neater than it ever has in these talks. Wow. Cool. So the trick, the way to optimize the system in my book is cognitive behavioral therapy. It's used to treat most mental illnesses. When I was in Psych Undergrad 101 and I had to do a test and this was an answer, is always the answer. It was like circling C on a math test. It was just always it. CBT is as effective as antidepressant drugs for treating depression in some studies. It's like equivalent, although the combined is more effective often. You're probably thinking, maybe, I think half the room might be thinking, I don't want therapy though. I'm a healthy individual, I don't need therapy. Oh, well, let's call it training then. Cognitive behavioral training. This can apply to all of you, I'm sure. All right, how do you do cognitive behavioral training? Just install it, run it. So I have to admit, I'm not actually a Perl developer. I had someone help me with this. I do more Ruby and JavaScript. So perpetual introspection, like always be monitoring yourself, always be mindful and thinking about the process using the techniques we're about to cover. So this part's called debugging your brain. We're going to have you hit a debugger breakpoint, inspect the context, all of the local variables you have access to and the functions you might be able to call from where you are. Reading code, like just trying to figure out what the system is. It's kind of a black box. You have to test it, see what things are going on. And then there's a whole section on code, smells, and refactoring. That's my favorite part. All right, how do you hit the debugger breakpoint in your brain? I have a technique I came up with my mother called the whoop technique. Allow me to illustrate. Here's my mom. She just snapped at my brother because he left the door open. And then she felt bad about it. Like she didn't mean to yell, but a little stress. So she does this. Whoop! This pauses her, hits the debugger breakpoint. She's going to take a moment and think, why am I upset? Hold on, stop everyone. I'm going to think real quick. That enters her into the whoop state, where she inspects what's going on, all of her inputs, and works with it. I'm proud that she stopped. She didn't, in that first moment, in that story, didn't say whoop yet, but we've worked with her since then, and now the whole family whoops her whenever we feel it. She doesn't mind. She's opted in to being whooped. Anytime she does take a moment to think about it, that's a huge, awesome thing that is worth encouraging, even if you don't know what to do next. You have to know how to hit the debugger before you can know what to do while you're in the debugger. So hitting it is a great milestone. All right, cool. Let's say now we're experts at hitting the debugger. We always catch it in the moment or after the fact, and you can, after the fact counts too. Let's look at the context. What's going on? What's our local variables that we can access? We already talked about two of them, the automatic thoughts and automatic feelings. Those are inputs to your system, so you have to take stock of those. And hopefully you can treat them as input, as data, and you don't judge them and be upset about them, because that's helping you downward spiral if you do that instead. There's two more I want to point out. One is external stimuli, like events that happen to you, stuff that happen like a phone call or a meeting or something someone says, or anything external to you is its own category. And then bodily state. I taught you the portmanteau hangry just now. There's any bodily state you can have, tired, sleepy, energized, on caffeine like me, and it affects how your system's going, and that counts too. In my mom's case, she was hangry. That's why she snapped. And as soon as she realized that, she had some food and apologized, and everything was awesome and great. It happens when you're a busy mom trying to take care of kids. Like, you can forget to eat very easily. All right, next section. Reading code. My metaphor is a little weaker here. So it's 6 processing techniques. 6 techniques for figuring out what's going on in the code base. I'm going to go through one at a time. Number 1, expanding your emotional vocabulary. If you have words to describe your feelings, you're more able to think of them, notice them, convey them to others, convey them to yourself, manipulate them in your head, and work with them. Like, if you have to name your variable something better than X if you're going to work with it. Talking with close friends is my favorite technique, because when I talk with a friend, I get feedback from them. I have to put it into words for them to understand, and they sometimes suggest ways of thinking and describing my situation that helps me refine how I think of it. It also helps validate me and make a closer relationship, and that's all really good too. If I don't have a friend handy, I could talk to a rubber duck. It counts pretty well too. If you had to put it into words for this entity on your desk, putting it into words is very powerful, yeah. Another way of putting it into words is journaling. And I don't mean you have to have a daily journal by your bedside table that has a little lock on it, but just writing in any form to yourself, or to journal, or to whatever you're imagining. Just writing it down, writing your thoughts down is a great way of processing. And sometimes when I rubber duck, really it's texting a Slack message to a coworker, which I delete because I figured out the answer to the problem. All right, this next one might be surprising to you. Reading fiction helps you deal with processing your own thoughts and feelings, because it's the only time you get a clear window into someone else's mind. Usually the narrator is the first person they're saying it, and he felt scared, and they put all of this into words, and that can help you put your own thoughts and feelings into words when it's a relatable character. There are studies that show that people who read more fiction have higher emotional intelligence in some ways. But this is great. If anyone ever told you reading fiction is useless, they're wrong. Sorry. All right, my last one for this set is meditation. It's the goal of meditation is usually to not think and process the things, but it can help you identify what the inputs are, any inputs you might have missed. So you just view the emotions and thoughts as inputs to your system in this state. Don't judge them, don't focus on them, just let them come by. Yep. So that's those 6. Maybe next time it'll be even prettier diagrams, but that's what I got for now. Whew! I'm giving you a lot of information. You see why I'm giving you homework? There's a lot in here. All right, next up, code smells and refactoring techniques. If you do cognitive behavioral therapy or read a book on it or anything like that, you will cover this. These are the 10 most common maladaptive thought patterns. If you want more code smells, Wikipedia has a list of more than 50, and I think some of those are really useful too. But here's the top 10. We're going to talk about a few, and I'd like you to print this. Literally print it, have a piece of paper out, because if you can study these and get these 10 down, it's going to change the way you think about stuff. I'm going to give you some examples and apply these terms to that. So I told you when I was running late to the meetup and I was wet and hungry, I thought to myself, automatic thought, I didn't really come up with this, but I said, wet shoes are the worst. And I was like, hang on, Casey, that's not like you. You don't usually think this kind of thought. What's going on here? And I said, I see. I'm magnifying the situation. I'm catastrophizing. The worst. I'm amplifying how bad it is. I thought to myself automatically again, if I'm late, I just shouldn't go. Nope. And that's an example of all or nothing thinking. It's like black and white thinking. So either I'm going on time or I'm not going. Going late is really fine. It's fine. It was fine. I also thought this is huge. Today sucks. This gets 3 of them. This is overgeneralizing the entire day, disqualifying all the positive stuff that happened earlier in the day, and it's jumping to conclusions that later in the day will also suck. When I noticed, and I didn't even come up with all 3 of these at the time, but I got one. I was like, yep, this is a code smell. I don't want to think this thought that today sucks. Let's try a more adaptive thought. So instead of those 3, I thought to myself, I am feeling frustrated. I didn't have quite the ring, but it kind of diffused me, which was the point. The hangriness will go away when I eat. I was trying to trying to have that solution arrow, not ruminate. And then I'll feel great after I dry off. I told you I was going to take my shoes off. Whew, so that's those 3. You learned the whoop technique for hitting your debugger breakpoint. You can do it out loud if you want, or you could do it quietly. It's up to you. The context is automatic thoughts and feelings, external stuff, and bodily state. That's how I would lay those out. If you have others you can think of, that's great. Add those to your list too. For reading code, you got those 6 emotion processing techniques with those icons I drew. And code smells and refactoring is the 10 maladaptive thought patterns that I want you to print out later. If you're into this, there are even more tools that you have at your disposal. One is seeing a therapist. If being in public talking to strangers is stressful at all, that could be a low level social anxiety or high, I don't know. And if you talk to a therapist, they can help with this a lot. It's like a personal trainer for your brain. Do you want a brain trainer? Sounds so good. All right, if therapist isn't your thing, or if it is, a lot of therapists recommend the second one. The CBT book, Feeling Good by David Burns, is the most prescribed book homework by therapists, according to some studies that I've seen. The book is pretty good. There's also a workbook version which costs more that has fill in the blanks, and I've had friends do that and they love it. It's awesome. Headspace is an app for meditation that helped me get into meditation a little bit, helped me view inputs as data, that kind of thing. And then Joyable is a web app for social anxiety specifically. There is no web app for non-social anxiety as far as I know, and I wish there would be one. Startup idea. It would be really helpful. You might be thinking, why doesn't everyone I know already do CBT if it's so amazing? I think I know why. It does take time and energy and effort, but mostly people just don't know about it. And you all are privileged to know about this phenomenon now. Congratulations. I hope you use this wisely. Some of you are thinking, I have a coworker who needs this. How can I get them to do it? So the answer is you can't. But you can influence them slightly to do it. You can model the behavior. You can do it yourself and share how it's affecting you, that kind of thing. But you can't make someone else do this. That is probably just going to make them frustrated with you. Don't do that. Oh, I just gave you a summary. I'm very proud. I made this image too. Yep, we talked about this. Bam, bam, bam. That's part A. I'm going to take some water. One sec. Good timing. I just got the halfway mark. Cool. Psychological safety. If you've heard this term, raise your hand for me. I want to get a gauge. Cool. It looks like a third of the room. It's not safe space, but I'll define that real quick. A safe space is one where anyone would feel safe in the group with respect to their identity. Like I'm a queer man, and if I'm in a space where they don't accept queer people, that would not be a safe space in general, specifically for me. A psychologically safe group is any group where the current members feel safe. So if it's a group of 5 bigots who would hate me, but they get along really well together, they might be a very productive group in some way. So it's a lower bar. Psychological safety is a lower bar. I think we could shoot for the higher one, but I'm going to just talk about this lower one today. Psychological safety says that the group is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. Amy Edmondson's one of the original researchers on this. This was her quote. She has a lot of content on this if you want to look her up. I discovered this through an article written by some people at Google. Google did research into what makes teams effective. It is not personality types or skills or background or the management style. It's none of those things that they thought might have been it. And they proved that pretty quickly when they were studying this. They were just trying to see what's the secret sauce that makes a team good. It wasn't until later when they found Amy Edmondson's research and tried to see if that applied that it did. Psychological safety. They noticed that it's group norms that do the thing. A group norm is like a set of implicit or explicit rules that the group follows that defines how you interact with other people and all that. And group norms that follow psych safety guidelines, or just happen to be psych safe, are really the ones that have this psych safety that are more effective in Google. In Amy Edmondson's research, there were these two measures. You know, when you're doing research, you have to measure things on scales and all that, get data and get hard evidence. One was conversational turn taking, which is how often each member in the group got to speak. If one person was quiet the entire time, that was a lower point on this scale. The other one is average social sensitivity, which I think in the study they did with a reading the mind through the eyes test. They showed a series of photos of people's eyes, and you just say, do they look angry, excited, happy? And if you're good at that, you're more emotionally sensitive to those kinds of cues. And if you're not as good, you're not as emotionally sensitive. And if you're higher, your group is probably more successful. I'm going to simplify these two measures into broader categories. This is less scientific, but more memorable. It's communication and empathy. So a team that has high communication and high empathy is going to have higher psych safety. If the group has higher psych safety, it's safe for interpersonal risk-taking. You could say that the group has a higher collective IQ. Said another way, if all 6 members of the team get their voices heard all the time, that's smarter than if there's only 5 people on the team getting their voices heard. If one person's shut down, they're not contributing as much. So we want to have everybody contribute their thoughts to the situation. All right, so we're on the same page. We want psych safety on the team. I'm going to give you 10 techniques in 10 minutes. Bam, 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 bam. You ready?
Yes, we're ready.
Yes, good. Here are the 10. Communication first. My favorite term. This is my favorite thing to define for you today. The earned dogmatism effect. I bet you've worked with someone who has this. This is when somebody has a lot of experience and they're so sure that their way of doing the thing is the right way, the best way, that they don't even want to hear the other ways. Nope, kind of closed-minded. In some cases, dogmatism like that is useful. I'm dogmatic about basic math. 2 + 2. Don't tell me it's not 4. I know it's 4. You can't change my mind. Nope. But when it comes to complex things like a code base, that's very complex. It's important to have a more open mind and see other perspectives because you might be missing information. So the antidote to the earned dogmatism effect, if there is one, it's not a complete one, is to remind the person who's doing this, they don't have all the information. They're missing some information. Would you like that information? And often they would. If they believe they're missing it, they'll open their mind, maybe. That's the best I've had for that situation. Number 2, declare unknowns. I see teams do this often during a planning meeting, where you say, okay, what are the risks for this project? What things do we not know yet? And I see teams often not do it after the planning meeting. So if you model this, if you do this more often, you declare things you don't know all the time, you're going to be on the same page, and you might have to investigate those to reduce risk, and that would be great. So doing this more often increases communication. If you don't declare unknowns in general, when you realize you don't know something, you might be hesitant to share that with the team. And that's an example of where psych safety is, you don't have it, and it's hurting your team performance. Framing. We talked about framing a little bit before when I told you that I like to be excited when I'm uncertain. When something goes wrong at work, like maybe you did a deploy and it broke the server and everything went down for users, that's awful. You could frame it as bad, wrong, bad, I should feel bad, I should feel awful, I'm awful, and ruminate, you could feel awful. Or you could try to frame it as a learning experience and say, oh, our deployment infrastructure is brittle. Why didn't CI run before I deployed? Let's fix that, like that kind of thing. And as a team, if you frame things as learning opportunities more often, people are more likely to bring up mistakes they made, and everyone can learn from them. That's awesome. We all make mistakes, and if you acknowledge it publicly more often, that makes more people able to communicate this kind of thing more often. So I like to tell people, I make mistakes, I don't know things, and I know so. Please tell me if you find out something I don't know. I really am interested in knowing what I don't know, knowing what mistakes I make. For new people, you'll benefit from doing this on a team. If you're a more junior developer, I think junior people do this a little more than senior people. If you do this, that sets a good model for the whole team. That's powerful. You can also model curiosity. Anything another team member is working on and you don't understand it completely, if you ask questions and you want to know a little more about it, that might spark some ideas that they didn't think of on their own. And then, bus factor reduction, that's useful too, all that. modeling curiosity yourself can influence the team to also to do more curiosity, questioning all the time. The more you do it, the more it affects the team. So all these things, if you want your teammates to do it, you can start by you doing it more publicly, more actively, more on purpose. Those were 5 about communication. Next up, we're talking empathy. Propinquity is my other favorite term. Propinquity is a social science term for closeness, social closeness. It's different than physical closeness. So, for example, I have a neighbor at the apartment next to mine, and I've never seen them. I don't know their face. I see stuff outside their door. They have like water jugs. Maybe it's a home office. I don't know what's going on. I do not have high propinquity with this person. Technically, we're physically close, but socially, we're not close at all. But the person I have lunch with at work all the time, we have very high propinquity. We're always interacting naturally. We like cross paths. We see each other. It's important to have propinquity with your teammates. So if you're a remote distributed team, you probably have generally lower propinquity than if you were in the office. That's why I like channels like #FluffyChat. That's where we post fluffy animals at my last company. Stuff like that to just like have more natural interaction with teammates. That's powerful. Like regular one-on-ones, video chat online can also help with that, because that's more like you see them in the hallway, but you schedule it. But it's fine. That's fine. That counts. All right, this is such a good word. I want to give you a mnemonic to remember it. Remember that TV show with the 2 rats that tried to take over the world? Propinquity in the brain. Propinquity in the brain. Now it's going to be stuck in your head. Sorry, but you learned a word. Next topic. Every time you communicate to someone else, you communicate on 2 channels. There's a task channel and a relationship channel. If you think you're only communicating on the task channel, saying fact, 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 I mean, that's all you're explicitly communicating on, true, but there's an implicit relationship channel that's also going. If it's implicit, the other person might have to infer what the content of that channel is, and we know people are generally, it's going to be negative if it's uncertain. So I would encourage you to explicitly communicate on the relationship channel as well whenever there is uncertainty. If you have high trust with someone, maybe you don't need to do it. You're on the same page. You're a close friend. You don't got to cushion everything you say with them, probably. But a teammate or in a high-risk situation, you probably want to communicate explicitly. So here's an acronym, Perls. You can see I grade out a lot. I'm going to give you one example. The rest is homework. The first one, P, partnership. If you said a statement like, I really want to work on this with you, I'm excited to do this with you, that's saying explicitly that the relationship between us is good, positive, I want it. Like, the ambiguity on the relationship channel is gone if you say something like that. And there's a lot of other categories. Empathy, acknowledgement, respect, legitimation, and support. You can find this bullet point in an article that I linked to in the notes. More homework. Next concept is validation. I bet half of you think you know what this means, but it's a little bit off. This definition here with the bold word understandable, this is pretty important. You can validate someone even if you completely disagree with them. It's the recognition that another person's thoughts, feelings, behaviors are understandable given their context, given what they know, given their background and experience, given. Of course you would think that. And if you can validate someone, that helps put down their defenses. They can open up. They'll talk more. It's powerful to do with like friends and coworkers. If you want to do a good job of it, there's a whole framework for it by Marsha Linehan, who made DBT, which is like CBT plus validation with concrete validation techniques. Here's her scale of 6 layers of validation that therapists do with their clients, and I do with my friends anyway. This happens, you already do all these, whether you have the scale and the words for it, but knowing the scale is pretty useful, because sometimes I'll forget to validate, and then I'll be like, oh, right, which one can I do? Oh yeah, that one, got it. Or sometimes I'll do a low-level one, but I can do a little higher. I'm not going to teach you all 6 of these, although I wish I could. There's not time. But I'll tell you maybe the difference between 4 and 5. 4 is your friend is afraid of a dog because they were bit as a child. So then you're walking down the street and the dog goes by and they get afraid. You're like, oh, I know why you're afraid. I get it. It's okay. That makes sense that you would be afraid of a dog because of your back. Yeah. Like saying that, acknowledging it, even implicitly, that's validating. Number 5 might be if your friend is afraid of a spider, because humans in general are biologically hardwired to be afraid of spiders, and saying that is more powerful than saying, yeah, you were bit by a spider when you were little. No, anyone would be afraid of a spider, or snake, if you want to choose the snake. Maybe that's more generally scary. So that's 2 that I was surprised that the general was more powerful than the specific, and maybe on context it would be the other way, maybe. But just knowing that these are your options, I think, is powerful. The very lowest level is just being present with someone. So if your grandfather just passed away, or your friend's grandfather, and you just sit with them while they're sad, that's validating. Your presence is validating already. But if your grandfather passed away recently too, and you can really deeply relate to it, and you know, and you can connect on that level, that would be 6 radical genuineness, the strongest validation you can do. I want to give you more examples for all these. I could do a whole talk on this, but we have to keep moving. Next up, this one's a little divisive. I like to depersonalize ideas. If I have an idea and it's good and it ends up turning out very well, I don't mind having the credit. That's all very good. I like it. But if I'm not sure how it's going to turn out and I offer an idea to the table, I don't really want my name attached to this thing. I'm just brainstorming. I'd rather say idea A. Don't put my name on it. And people usually give me some resistance because it's the easiest. It's so quick. You know Casey said it, so you're going to say Casey's idea. But getting my name off of it can make an easier conversation, and we're less biased toward like choosing based on the person who said it, all that. I like to depersonalize ideas when I can. And then after the fact, if it turns out well, you can give credit. My last one here is vulnerability. If you can be vulnerable with your friends, family, coworkers, that builds more deep trust. If you can share things that are sensitive and they get validated, you can trust them more, and you don't have to be so explicit in your relationship channel and all that. This is powerful and deep. There are some talks by Brené Brown that you may have seen on YouTube. I linked to those. Those are really good. And she has a book or 2. Totally recommend it. I'm not going to go any deeper today. So you just learned these 10 things. You might want to revisit this eventually, which is why I made the article online for you, because you're only going to be able to apply 1 or 2 of these at a time, I bet. That's how people generally are. A lot to work on. All right, outro. This is what that website looks like that I keep telling you about. It's a Google Doc that I published online where I just put links. It's the easiest thing for me to edit. I'm a web developer, sure, but I like easy. I'd like you to bookmark that I just showed you. I'd like you to print. There's a few in purple. No, how do I go back? Back. It says print, save this. Those I think are the most useful if you want to print it physically or save it to your desktop, something, have it handy. That's highest recommended. Otherwise, I think you would benefit a lot if you strategize how and when you're going to go through the articles. So for me, it might be like every Monday at 9:30 after my stand-up, I'm going to go read 1 article. Sure, something. Or maybe I'll put them in my pocket and I'll read on the metro, something. But if you think this is valuable, you should strategize how you're going to get it done. I told you about the video. If you want your company to learn this, I've given this talk. This is number 18, I think. It's very polished. I can do a lunch and learn at your company, especially if you're in the DC area, because that's where I live. If you pay for me to fly out, maybe we'll talk, sure. I can also do a half-day workshop with the team where we can brainstorm and go through and do validation exercises and all that. It's really powerful. I've done that at Heroku a couple times. I'm also working on the book format for debugging your brain, and half the book is both written and edited, like I told you, and that's on my website. You can already read it for free. When it's done, I'm going to self-publish on Amazon, maybe eventually a real publisher too, but I don't see that much value in it if it gets spread anyway. Amazon self-publishing is easy, and they take such a small cut. I'm excited for it. Yeah, any questions? Thank you. Yeah. Sorry, can you say it louder? Depersonalizing ideas can conflict with validation. I can imagine it could. I can't think of an example. I think you're right. You can't. Well, if you got good at both of these, you would know when to use which technique. You can't always. But I don't think you need to invalidate to depersonalize an idea either. You can say, that's an idea, great idea, but let's reduce our biases. Blah, 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 blah. Like, that's validating while depersonalizing. Yeah. Questions? Yeah. I'm so glad you asked. The validation part is so tricky. All those labels they kind of suck. They're inaccurate, but there's no short thing that's accurate. Then validation, mind reading, means if they can't already tell you what they're thinking and feeling accurately, you can suggest, are you thinking X or Y or Z? And like brainstorm. It's really brainstorming, but like trying to make a good guess at what it is, but you have to let them, and they have to be comfortable to tell you whether you're accurately guessing or not. And if they're not, it's not working. You're invalidating at that point. If you mind read inaccurately and they don't feel comfortable correcting you, that is invalidating. That's the opposite. In the 10 maladaptive thought patterns, if you think you can mind read other people, like, oh, they hate me, that person hates me, but you have no like evidence, they never said it, that's when that's maladaptive, because you are believing something strongly that you have no evidence for. So really it's brainstorming would be the other one. Good question. No one's asked that ever. I think I can do one more question, I bet, with my time. Yeah.
Because that's just the presentation. Q&A's after that.
Oh, good. I'm ahead of schedule. A couple more questions? Yeah, thank you.
Could you talk about safe spaces? The safe, psychologically safe thing. One of the things you said is important is people who are socially aware. But I think a lot of people feel like I'm not very socially aware anyway. So I think it also has to be safe if people feel a bit klutzy.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Not to say we only want sensitive people here. I think people will come and say, maybe I'm not very sensitive. I'd like to be more sensitive. But, it needs to be safe to be not good at it too.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you hit that. How do I summarize?
It's okay to be on the autistic spectrum.
Yeah, sure. I think if your intent is there, that's what truly counts. If you intend to be sensitive, and if someone calls you out, you are receptive and work with it, that's the thing. You don't have to be good at like socializing, you just have to value it. That's how I see it. I've known some people who don't value it, and that is trouble on some teams. I don't know how to help those people if they don't care. Probably two more questions. Yeah.
Following up on the same subject, do you know if there is research currently being done in psychological safety in teams involving people with Asperger's?
I don't know, but that would be fascinating. I really hope it's in progress or that it'll happen soon. Good question. So if somebody on the team is not contributing, they're not communicating as much, how can you help them communicate more? I think by helping them feel more safe, that's like the answer. Okay, now how do we do that? How do we do that? Smaller groups are generally safer. Actually, I have a whole bonus section that's very related to this. I'm excited. I'm going to give you the bonus section today. Yeah, so a smaller group might be good. So one-on-one with the person to talk to them some. That'll help. If they can build confidence in the small one-on-one group, maybe a third person, fourth person. Sometimes giving pause so that someone who contributes things more slowly, that takes more time to collect their words so they can contribute it. Like if you've been to an unconference, unconferences tend to do this pretty well, the ones I've been to. They make room for people who communicate slower to communicate still. I think there's a lot more ideas, but I think that's enough for now, probably. Thanks, Don. Yeah.
Just one add-on about that. Some people simply don't like to look at the stuff or communicate. So you may be dealing with a person who get them talking, contributing and there may actually be someone outside who they want to be.
Yeah, sometimes a person just doesn't feel comfortable doing it, and it's hard because we're pushing them out of their normal boundaries. Did I catch it right? No.
Some people are just quiet. They are comfortable being quiet. That is how they prefer to be.
Oh, the opposite. Yeah.
Want to be contributing like everybody else. So pushing them to do so may not be the right thing to do.
Yeah, pushing some people.
Accepting how they are as quiet people may be the right thing to do.
Yeah. pushing some people to do that, to contribute as much as everyone else, might be very stressful for them and bad for them as a person, as their experience on the team, and not even help make them contribute actively. I think that's true. In the conversational turn-taking measure, it's a little bit inaccurate of a term, again, because we're like generalizing high level here, but it counts over the course of the day, I think. If it's in one-on-one meetings, that's fine. It doesn't have to be in every active, all hands, a lot of people meeting that everybody contributes. That's not the measure. The measure is that you do it at some point eventually. And I think a team member in this case would, in some smaller, safer situation, be able to do it. And that would be great. That's working with them too. Thank you. All right, you ready for my bonus slides? Yeah, we're done. Oh, but we're not. This is a hypothesis I'm working on. If I went to study a PhD program, I would study the social battery phenomenon. This is totally, I'm making this up here. If its metaphor seems relevant to you and you can apply it to yourself and it helps, great. If not, fine, sure. There's no study behind this yet. Yeah, thank you. Yet. I may yet do it. A downward spiral event probably really drains your social battery. You don't feel like peopling after you're in such a bad state. So that's one way you can feel your social battery charge depleted. I should reorder these slides, but they're bonus, you see. They're not very polished as much as the others. Okay, the goal is here, when talking about social battery, is to understand yourself so you can manage your own social battery resource, and to understand other people so you can understand, like, validate, work with your friends, coworkers, etc. So here's a dichotomy that's very common, extrovert versus introvert. People like to say an extrovert gains energy from being around people, and an introvert loses energy by being around people. So that's a social battery. This isn't the most accurate definition to me, because if you have someone isolated forever, an introvert who's isolated for years, they won't be happy either. They need some social interaction. And even an extrovert, if they people all the time, they're going to get peopled out eventually, probably. Or if they're in a bad situation, peopling, something could drain their battery. So the battery, I think, is slightly different than just extrovert, introvert. All right, let's talk about what can drain people's batteries in both categories. If there's a lot of people around, I think your battery is more likely to drain faster. If there are less familiar people, if they're all strangers, you're more likely to drain. And if it's a high-risk interaction, like if you're being interviewed, and they already seem like they don't like you, that's pretty draining. I think most people charge slowly by being alone. Introverts focus on this more. Introverts need downtime, sure, yep. Extroverts, I think, also charge slowly by being alone some amount, just not as fast as the ideal extrovert situation. I think both types of people charge faster when there's fewer people around, like an extrovert with their best friend probably is still charging. An introvert around fewer people is maybe more charging. Yeah, this is like the opposite. So if you're in a one-on-one with your best friend and it's low risk, just hanging out, that might charge you. The most interesting thing I discovered when talking to friends about this, like interviewing, doing, what's the word? Not data. Anecdotal research, thank you. Yeah, I was doing anecdotal research on friends a lot. And there's a whole category of people who have never felt their social battery charged by any other human. Except maybe, I got a few of these little edge case stories, when they had their childhood best friend, they charged them. But since now they're an adult, they don't have anyone to charge them. And I just think that's fascinating. So maybe they didn't have such a close, intimate, safe, psychologically safe relationship with anyone in this adult life now. And that would make them more introverted, of course. They'd want more alone time to charge. They can't charge from the other people. All right, so there are two ideas at play here. The battery, which I think we've covered pretty well. You got it. And then the other one is social satisfaction, is what I would label it if I did this research. So your battery can charge or deplete based on all these factors, but you need a certain amount of social satisfaction to be happy. If you're isolated, you won't be. Introverts need some people time too. All right, so battery. I like the analogy of a battery because it can like charge and drain and it's powering something. What's it powering? I think it's probably powering a mental simulation you have of the people around you. So if that's true, then this is what would drain it, is modeling more people who you're less familiar with. It kind of makes sense to me. I would love to research and see if this is true. That's it for my bonus material. Any question on that part? All right. I bet you're ready for lunch after someone else speaks up here, I bet. I can't wait to eat too. Thanks for having me.